The queue outside Blackwell's Edinburgh stretched around the corner onto South Bridge, a line of eager readers clutching worn paperbacks and pristine hardcovers, all waiting for Sean Connery's rare public appearance at what the bookstore had advertised as an evening with a legend. In '78, Sean had agreed to this book signing only because the proceeds would benefit Edinburgh's struggling local libraries, and because Blackwell's had been his favorite bookstore since his struggling actor days in the 1950s. Next, please, Sean called from behind the signing table, his voice carrying the warmth that had made him beloved by generations of fans. He had been signing books for nearly 2 hours, exchanging brief pleasantries with each person while maintaining the kind of genuine attention that made everyone feel like they were his only visitor of the evening. The woman who approached his table was different from the others, though Sean couldn't immediately identify why. She appeared to be in her 70s with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and clothing that spoke of refined taste rather than great wealth, but it was her eyes that caught Sean's attention. Sharp, intelligent, and carrying something that looked like barely controlled emotion. "Mr. Caudry," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she placed a battered paperback copy of From Russia with Love on the table. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore. I've been waiting 60 years to meet you." John paused, his pen hovering over the title page. Something in her tone suggested this was more than typical fan enthusiasm. "60 years is quite a long time, Mr. Whitmore. May I ask what makes today special?" Eleanor glanced around at the crowded bookstore, then back at Sean with obvious internal debate about whether to continue. "This might sound foolish," she said finally, "but you saved my marriage once. Well, not you personally, but James Bond did. You're James Bond." Sean set down his pen entirely and gave Eleanor his complete attention. "That don't sound foolish at all. Would you mind telling me how?" Eleanor looked surprised by his genuine interest. "Oh, I don't want to hold up the queue. You must have hundreds of people waiting." Sean glanced at the long line of expectant faces, then at the bookstore manager, who was hovering nearby with obvious concern about the schedule. "Ms. Whitmore," Sean said decisively, "would you mind terribly if I asked you to wait until I finish with everyone else? I'd very much like to hear your story properly without feeling rushed." "You really want to hear it?" "I really do." 2 hours later, as the last customer departed with their signed book and the bookstore staff began cleaning up, Eleanor Whitmore still sat patiently in the corner armchair where Sean had asked her to wait. Now they were alone except for a few staff members counting receipts and straightening shelves. "Now then," Sean said, settling into the chair across from Eleanor with a cup of tea the staff had provided, "please tell me about James Bond and your marriage." Eleanor smiled, her earlier nervousness replaced by the warmth that comes from having someone's undivided attention. "This was 1963, she began. "I was 23, married to my childhood sweetheart David for exactly 18 months. We thought we knew everything about love and life. The dangerous age for young marriages." "Precisely. I mean, we were both working, I as a secretary, David as a junior accountant, trying to save money for our first house, living in a tiny flat that felt smaller every day. The romance of being newlyweds was wearing off, and we were discovering that real marriage was much harder than the fairy tale version we'd imagined." Sean nodded, remembering his own first marriage and the particular challenges of early adulthood combined with new commitment. "We'd started arguing about everything," Eleanor continued. "Money, housework, whose turn it was to visit which relatives, whether we could afford a holiday, silly things really, but they felt enormous at the time. They always do when you're young. David started working longer hours to avoid coming home to the tension. I started spending my evenings at my mother's house, complaining about how marriage wasn't what I'd expected. We were 23 years old and already considering ourselves a failed experiment." Eleanor paused to sip her tea, clearly organizing her thoughts for the important part of the story. Then one Friday evening in October, David came home with 2 cinema tickets. He said he'd heard good things about some new spy film, thought we might enjoy an evening out together for the first time in months. "From Russia with Love," Sean said quietly. "Exactly. I wasn't particularly interested. I thought spy films were just silly boys' adventure stories, but it was the first time in weeks that David had suggested doing something together, so I agreed." Eleanor's eyes grew brighter as she remembered that long ago evening. But watching that film, watching you as James Bond, something shifted for both of us, not because of the action or the exotic locations, but because of how Bond treated the women in his life. Sean raised his eyebrows, curious about where this was heading. You have to understand, Eleanor explained, this was 1963. Most men in films, most men in real life, treated women as either helpless decoration or nagging obstacles, but your Bond was different. Um, how so? He listened to women, really listened. When Tatiana spoke, Bond paid attention to what she was saying, not just how she looked saying it. He treated her intelligence as valuable, her opinions as worth hearing. He was attracted to her mind as much as her beauty. Sean felt genuinely moved by this interpretation of his performance. After the film, Eleanor continued, David and I went for coffee, and for the first time in months, we actually talked to each other instead of arguing or avoiding conversation. David said watching Bond made him realize he'd stopped really listening to me, stopped asking what I thought about things that mattered, and that made a difference. It changed everything. David asked me what I actually wanted from our marriage, what my dreams were beyond just being someone's wife. I told him I'd always wanted to go to university, study literature, maybe become a teacher. Eleanor's voice grew stronger with obvious pride in the memory. Most men in 1963 would have said education was a waste of money for a married woman. But David said if Bond could respect women's intelligence, he certainly could too. He suggested we rearrange our finances so I could attend university part-time while working. That was quite progressive for the time. It was revolutionary for our little world. But more than that, David started asking my opinion about his work, about our future plans, about everything. And I started really listening to his concerns and dreams instead of just focusing on what was annoying me. Sean felt amazed by this unexpected impact of his work. We modeled our marriage on what we'd seen in that cinema, Eleanor continued. Not the spy adventure part, obviously, but the way Bond treated relationships as partnerships between equals, the way he valued women's contributions. Did it work? Eleanor's smile was radiant. We were married for 54 years until David died 3 years ago. I did get my degree, became a head teacher, eventually a headmistress. David became a successful accountant, but he always said his greatest achievement was supporting my education and career. John felt overwhelmed by this revelation. Mrs. Whitmore, that's one of the most beautiful things anyone has ever told me about my work. But that's not the end of the story, Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling. Here's more. David and I raised 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. We made sure all of them understood that marriage should be a partnership of equals, that men and women both had valuable contributions to make to family decisions. Eleanor reached into her handbag and pulled out a photograph. Our son is a pediatric surgeon who shares childcare duties equally with his wife, who's a research scientist. Our eldest daughter is a high court judge whose husband manages their home and children's schedules. Our youngest daughter runs her own architectural firm while her husband teaches primary school. Sean studied the photograph showing 3 successful, happy-looking families. We told all our children that their relationships should be like James Bond's partnership with smart, capable women, based on mutual respect, genuine interest in each other's thoughts and dreams, and the understanding that both partners bring valuable strengths to the relationship. That's extraordinary. Mr. Connery, your portrayal of Bond didn't just entertain millions of people. It gave a young couple a template for how to treat each other with dignity and respect. 3 generations of our family have built their relationships on principles we learned watching you value women as complete human beings. Sean felt tears pricking his eyes. Eleanor, in 50 years of acting, no one has ever told me that my work had such a profound impact on their real life. Well, it did, and I wanted to thank you before it was too late to say it properly. Sean reached across and gently took Eleanor's hand. Thank you for waiting 60 years to tell me this story. It means more than any review or award ever could. You know what the wonderful thing is, Eleanor said. I'm not the only one. David and I introduced dozens of young couples to those early Bond films over the years, always telling them to watch how Bond treated women as equals. I suspect your portrayal influenced more marriages than you'll ever know. As they prepared to leave the now quiet bookstore, Eleanor handed Sean something unexpected. A letter written in careful script. What's this? Something David wrote before he died. He'd always wanted to thank you personally for giving us a model of how husbands should treat wives. He never got the chance to meet you, but he asked me to deliver this if I ever had the opportunity. John read the letter there in the bookstore, feeling profoundly moved by David Whitmore's gratitude for a performance he had given decades earlier, never knowing it would become a template for treating marriage as true partnership. Mrs. Whitmore, Sean said as they walked toward the bookstore's exit, you've given me something precious tonight, the understanding that sometimes our work matters in ways we never intended or imagined. And you've given me the chance to complete a 60-year journey of gratitude. As Eleanor disappeared into the Edener evening, Sean realized that her story had reminded him why he had chosen acting in the first place, not just to entertain, but to show people different ways of being human, different possibilities for how we might treat each other with dignity and respect. 6 weeks later, Sean would receive a package in the mail containing wedding photos spanning 3 generations of the Whitmore family, along with a note, 3 generations of partnerships built on bond principles. Thank you for showing us what equality in love looks like. It wasn't just a book signing, it was the discovery that sometimes our greatest achievements aren't the ones that make headlines, but the quiet ways our work inspires people to treat each other better, love each other more completely, and build lives based on mutual respect rather than traditional limitations.